May 13th, 1943. A cramped office in the Kriegsmarine headquarters, Berlin. Kapitän zur See Werner Hartenstein sat motionless before an object that should not exist. The metal cylinder, roughly 17 inches in diameter and 30 inches long, rested on the examination table like evidence at a trial. Paint stripped away. Internal mechanisms exposed. Every seal, every valve, every pressure sensor laid bare under harsh laboratory lighting. Hartenstein had commanded U-boats in the Atlantic. He understood depth. He understood pressure. He understood how German crews dove to 200 feet, then 300 when the hammering started overhead. Standard defensive doctrine. Every U-boat commander learned it. Dive deep. The British depth charges detonated at 150, maybe 200 feet, get below their effective range, survive until the destroyers gave up. Except they weren't giving up anymore. And crews weren't surviving. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The cylinder before him was a British Mark 7 depth charge pistol, recovered from wreckage floating in the North Atlantic after a convoy battle. A simple device. Water pressure entered a chamber through calibrated holes. When pressure reached a threshold, the mechanism tripped. The charge detonated. Nothing sophisticated. Nothing revolutionary. Just basic hydrostatics applied to explosives. What made Hartenstein's hands tremble wasn't the mechanism itself. It was the depth setting. The pistol had been configured to detonate at 350 feet. He'd found 2 more pistols in the recovered debris, both set for depths beyond 300 feet, one configured for 450 feet. Depths German intelligence insisted were impossible for Allied depth charges. The implications assembled themselves with the mechanical precision of torpedo calculators. Every tactical manual, every training doctrine, every survival strategy taught to U-boat crews for 4 years, all based on a fundamental assumption that was wrong. The British could reach them anywhere. There was no safe depth. Behind him, papers rustled. Admiral Eberhard Gott, Chief of Operations for the U-boat fleet, moved to the table. 48 years old, career naval officer. He'd spent the morning reviewing casualty reports from May's first 2 weeks. Numbers that made no tactical sense. 41 U-boats lost since the month began. Not damaged, not driven off. Lost, sunk, gone. 783 men dead, not in a single catastrophic battle like Jutland, not in a fleet engagement with destroyers and battleships trading salvos. Just gone. Scattered across 10,000 square miles of ocean. Destroyed in 1s and 2s and 3s by convoy escorts that shouldn't have been able to find them, shouldn't have been able to track them, and absolutely should not have been able to kill them at depths where German doctrine said they were safe. When did they start producing these? Gott's voice carried the flat effect of a man calculating his own obituary. Hartenstein consulted the intelligence summary. Captured documents indicate initial deployment in early 1943. Production accelerated rapidly. Current estimates suggest most British escorts carry at least 30 of these modified charges. Some carry over 100. The mathematics were brutal. A convoy escort group typically included 6 to 8 destroyers plus corvettes. If each carried 50 depth charges with deep settings, a single convoy could deploy 400 weapons, capable of reaching German submarines at any operational depth. The old calculations, the ones that governed when to break off an attack, when to dive, when to surface and run, were worse than useless. They were lethal. Gott reached for the pistol, turning it slowly under the light. Our crews have been diving to 300 feet for safety. Yes, Herr Admiral. And these charges are detonating at 350. 450. Yes, sir. Silence expanded to fill the room. Beyond the office walls, Berlin continued its daily rhythm. Streetcars rattling past. Civilian workers hurrying between buildings. The Reich Chancellery conducting the business of governing a nation at war. None of them understanding what was being decided in this cramped office with its salvaged British hardware and its impossible depth settings. The door opened without preamble. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz entered, uniform crisp despite the hour. 51 years old, commander of the entire U-boat arm since its inception. The man who'd built the Wolfpack tactics. The man who'd nearly strangled Britain's supply lines in 1942. The man who'd promised Hitler that submarines would win the war. He stopped at the table. His eyes found the pistol, found the depth gauge, found the calculation sheets covered in Hartenstein's cramped handwriting. He said nothing for 10 seconds. 15. When he spoke, his voice carried the tone of a doctor reading terminal diagnosis results. "Show me." Hartenstein spread the documents across the table, recovery reports from destroyed U-boats, survivor testimonies, technical analysis of the depth charge pistols, intelligence summaries from interrogated British prisoners, production estimates, deployment timelines, the accumulated evidence of a tactical revolution that German intelligence had missed completely. We recovered these pistols from 2 separate convoy battles, North Atlantic, May 4th, and May 7th. Both sets show identical modifications, extended depth capability. The British designated them Type D Star and Type D Double Star in 1917. We knew about those, but we believed current British depth charges were limited to 200 feet maximum depth. Dönitz picked up a photograph showing a recovered pistol mechanism. Why did we believe that? Because that was the operational limit in 1918, Herr Großadmiral, and because British security around this modification has been exceptional. They've been deploying these weapons since at least January, possibly earlier. Our intelligence services found no documentation, no signals traffic, no prisoner statements, nothing. How many U-boats? The question hung in the stale office air. How many U-boats lost because they dived to prescribed safety depths that weren't safe? How many commanders followed doctrine and died? How many crews drowned in steel coffins 300 feet down while British escorts dropped charges they never suspected could reach them? Hartenstein had done the mathematics. May alone, 41 boats lost. But the pattern extended back months. April, 15 boats. March, 12 boats. The losses accelerating as British production of deep-set charges increased. Working backwards through casualty reports, cross-referencing survivor testimonies, identifying cases where boats reported successful deep dives before going silent. Minimum estimate, 70 boats since January, possibly as many as 120. We can't be certain. Many boats simply disappeared. No distress signals, no debris, no survivors. We attributed it to mines, to aircraft bombs, to acoustic torpedoes. But the pattern matches depth charge attacks where boats dived deep and never resurfaced. The silence that followed had weight. Physical mass, 7,000 men. 70 boats representing 30 million Reichsmarks in construction costs. 70 crews trained for 2 years. 70 commanders, selected from the best graduates of the submarine school at Neustadt. Gone. Not because they made mistakes, not because they failed to follow doctrine, but because the doctrine itself was predicated on British capabilities that were 18 months out of date. Gott broke the silence first. The crews need to know immediately. Dönitz nodded slowly. What do we tell them? Dive deeper? The Type 7 can't operate safely beyond 800 feet test depth. Push. Beyond that and we're crushing our own boats. Stay shallow? British radar can find surfaced submarines 5 miles away in darkness. Their aircraft have it now too. We've already tried staying shallow in the Bay of Biscay. We lost 17 boats in April to air attack alone. The tactical dilemma unfolded like a chess problem, with no solution. Dive deep, die from depth charges. Stay shallow, die from aircraft. Run on the surface at night, die from radar-equipped destroyers. The British had systematically closed every option, not through a single brilliant innovation, but through the patient accumulation of incremental improvements. Better radar, better sonar, better depth charges, better coordination between ships and aircraft. And the Germans had missed it. Not because intelligence services were incompetent, not because analysts were lazy, but because the British had learned from 1917 They'd compartmentalized information. They'd maintained operational security so strict that depth charge modifications never appeared in signals traffic. Prisoners knew depth charges existed, but not their capabilities. Captured equipment went to the bottom before Germans could recover it. Until May. Until increasing U-boat losses forced increasingly desperate attacks on heavily defended convoys. Until damaged British escorts had to abandon enough depth charge throwers that German recovery teams finally retrieved intact examples. Until it was too late. Hartenstein watched Donitz's face. The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but his right hand had formed a fist, a small gesture, barely noticeable. But Hartenstein had served under Dönitz for 6 years. He recognized the sign. Fury, contained, controlled, directed inward at the realization that he'd sent men to their deaths following doctrine that was fundamentally compromised. The British War Cabinet approved unlimited depth charge production. In December 1942, Hartenstein continued, referencing the intelligence summary. Factories in Sheffield, Manchester, and Birmingham. Operating 3 shifts. Current production estimates exceed 15,000 charges monthly. They're deploying them to every escort in the Atlantic Fleet. Even the corvettes carry them now. The small ones, that we thought were nuisance vessels, they're carrying 30 to 40 charges each. With deep settings. Donitz's fist unclenched. His hand moved to the technical drawings. His finger traced the depth sensor mechanism. How deep can they go? This particular model is rated to 600 feet. British technical documents mention experimental models capable of 1,000 feet. We don't know if those have been deployed yet. A Type 7 hull implodes at approximately 800 feet. Yes. Herr Großadmiral. So there is no safe depth. No, sir. There is no safe depth. The morning sun angled through the office window, illuminating dust motes suspended in stale air. Outside, Berlin's street traffic generated a low rumble. Normal. Routine. The ambient sound of a city at war, but not yet comprehending defeat. Inside this office, 3 men confronted mathematics that admitted no argument. The British had won the depth charge battle before Germans knew the battle had begun. British industry was producing charges faster than U-boats could use torpedoes. British escorts were deploying weapons the Germans couldn't counter. British tactics had evolved faster than German intelligence could track. And 783 U-boats, built at tremendous cost, crewed by trained specialists, were now swimming targets in an ocean that offered no sanctuary. Dönitz straightened. His hand left the technical drawings. When he spoke again, his voice carried the careful neutrality of a man making decisions he knew were too late to matter. Draft new tactical guidance. All boats currently at sea. Maximum dive depth limited to 150 feet unless under immediate attack. Even, then, emergency deep dives not to exceed 250 feet. We're accepting the increased detection risk from shallow operations rather than diving into depth charge kill zones we can't escape. Gott was already writing. What about boats currently on patrol? Some are operating under old doctrine right now. Immediate signal to all boats. Priority Alpha. Break radio silence if necessary. The depth advantage we thought we had doesn't exist. They need to know before they dive into their coffins following procedure that will kill them. Hartenstein gathered the technical documents. The British will detect the signal traffic. Herr Großadmiral, they'll know we've discovered the deep charges. They already know we've discovered it. We recovered their equipment. They saw our recovery vessels. At this point, operational security doesn't matter. What matters is that our crews stop diving to depths where they think they're safe, but are actually swimming directly into the kill zone. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical adjustments. Training protocols at Neustadt would need revision. The submarine warfare manual's depth procedures were obsolete. The psychological impact on crews who'd trusted those procedures would be devastating. Every U-boat commander who'd survived depth charge attacks by diving deep would now understand that survival had been luck, not skill. that the technique they'd believed was keeping them alive had actually been a gamble with odds stacked heavily toward death. And then there was the larger strategic question, the one that Dönitz didn't want to articulate but that hung in the room like smoke. If the British had systematically modernized depth charges without German intelligence detecting it, what else had they modernized? What other capabilities existed in the Allied arsenal that German planning didn't account for? What other tactical assumptions were wrong? Gott finished writing the initial signal draft. He showed it to Dönitz. The Admiral read it twice, then nodded. Send it now. All boats at sea, all bases, all training schools, and prepare a briefing for the Führer's headquarters. This will require strategic re-evaluation of U-boat operations. The mathematics have changed. We're losing boats faster than yards can replace them. We're losing crews faster than training schools can produce them. And now we're learning that the tactical advantages we've been counting on don't exist. Hartenstein understood what wasn't being said. The Battle of the Atlantic was slipping away. Not through a single catastrophic defeat, not through one decisive battle where the superior force prevailed, but through the accumulated weight of small improvements, each individually minor, together overwhelming. The British had better radar, better sonar, better coordination, better aircraft, better tactics, and now, revealed almost casually through recovered wreckage, better depth charges, charges that could reach any depth a U-boat could survive, charges being produced in quantities that made defensive operations futile, charges that had been sinking boats for months, while German crews followed doctrine that killed them. One more thing, Herr Großadmiral. Hartenstein's voice was quiet. The recovered documents include production schedules. The British are manufacturing these deep charges at a rate of 15,000 monthly. Current deployment estimates suggest approximately 40% of Atlantic escorts now carry full loads of deep-set weapons. By June, that figure will exceed 70%. By August, 90%. Dönitz absorbed this. How many depth charges are we calculating they can deploy simultaneously against a single U-boat? In a standard convoy battle, with 6 escorts converging on sonar contact, we estimate between 200 and 300 depth charges within 15 minutes, all capable of detonating at depths our boats use for safety. The escorts have learned to work in teams. One maintains sonar contact, the others attack in sequence. They keep the boat deep, keep the crew disoriented, and keep dropping charges until something critical fails. Hull seams, ballast systems, control surfaces. Eventually, something breaks, and the boat either surfaces into gunfire or implodes, going deeper to escape. How many boats can survive that? The data suggests none. Herr Großadmiral. Not reliably. Individual boats have survived extended attacks through exceptional luck or extraordinary seamanship, but the British have refined the tactics. They're patient. They don't need to sink us quickly. They just need to keep us submerged and keep attacking until our batteries die or our crews break or our hulls fail. The afternoon stretched ahead, signals to draft, orders to issue, commanders to brief, training protocols to revise. And somewhere in the Atlantic, right now, German submarines were diving to depths they believed were safe, while British escorts above them rolled depth charges off stern racks, charges with pistols set to kill at 350 feet, at 400 feet, at depths where German commanders thought they'd found sanctuary. May had already claimed 41 boats, 17 days into the month, and losses exceeded any previous month in the entire war. At this rate, the entire operational U-boat fleet would be destroyed within 6 months. The British were building merchant ships faster than U-boats could sink them. American shipyards were launching Liberty ships at rates that made German submarine construction look like artisan craftsmanship. And now this. The revelation that fundamental German tactical doctrine was compromised. Dönitz left the office without speaking. Gott followed. Hartenstein remained alone with the British depth charge pistol. He picked it up, turned it slowly, examined the pressure sensor calibration. Such a simple device, machined steel and brass, water pressure acting on a diaphragm. Mechanical linkage. A spring-loaded striker, Basic physics applied with British precision. This small device, multiplied by 15,000 monthly, deployed across hundreds of escorts, had turned the Atlantic into a killing ground where there was no safe depth, no sanctuary, no tactical option that didn't involve accepting terrible risk. The Germans had built their tactical doctrine on assumptions about British capabilities. Those assumptions were wrong, and 783 U-boats would pay the price before Germany learned it. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The question haunting Hartenstein, the question he couldn't articulate to Dönitz, was simpler and more terrible. How many boats had already been lost? How many boats currently at sea were already doomed, following doctrine that would kill them? How many boats departing La Rochelle and Saint-Nazaire and Lorient today would dive to 300 feet next week when British escorts appeared, confident they'd found safety? Moments before, depth charges detonated around them and began the slow, crushing process of destroying their hull. He placed the pistol back on the examination table. The technical analysis was complete. The intelligence summary was written. The signals were being drafted. Now came the harder part, informing the crews. Explaining to men who trusted their training that their training was based on incorrect assumptions about enemy capabilities. Explaining that the depth procedures that kept them alive in 1941 and 42 were now getting them killed in 43. Explaining that there was no safe depth. That every dive was a gamble. That survival now depended less on skill than on luck. That the Atlantic had become an environment where British technology had systematically eliminated German tactical options. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution. British industry producing weapons faster than German industry could replace losses. British technology evolving faster than German intelligence could track it. British tactics improving through systematic analysis of what worked and what didn't. And German U-boats, still magnificent machines operated by brave crews, were being destroyed not through incompetence or cowardice, but through the simple reality that they were fighting with doctrine based on assumptions that were 18 months obsolete. The depth advantage didn't exist. The safe zones were myths, and 700 men had died this month learning it. Hartenstein gathered his papers. Time to brief the next group of commanders preparing for patrol. Time to explain that everything they'd learned about depth procedures needed to be unlearned. Time to tell them that the ocean offered no sanctuary anymore. The British depth charge pistol remained on the examination table. A small device, 17 inches in diameter, 30 inches long, simple hydrostatic mechanism, nothing revolutionary. Nothing extraordinary, just basic engineering applied with devastating effectiveness. It had taken the Kriegsmarine 4 months to discover it existed. By then, over 100 U-boats were already lost, and every day, more British escorts received full loads of these deep charges. More German boats departed on patrol following doctrine that would kill them. More crews trusted their training and died. The mathematics were inexorable. The British had won this battle. The question remaining was how long it would take Germany to accept the loss and what the cost would be before acceptance came. How many more boats? How many more crews? How many more men would follow procedure and dive deep, confident in their safety, moments before British depth charges arrived to prove that safety was an illusion? Hartenstein closed the office door behind him. The hallway stretched ahead, fluorescent lights, polished linoleum, staff officers moving between rooms, the normal rhythm of military bureaucracy. Signals sent, reports filed, decisions made, orders issued. And somewhere in the Atlantic, in cramped control rooms lit by red battle lights, U-boat commanders were checking depth gauges and ordering dives to 300 feet, confident they'd found sanctuary, while British escorts above them prepared depth charges with pistols set to kill at 350 feet. There was no safe depth anymore. The crews just didn't know it yet, but they would learn. The Atlantic was teaching that lesson every day, in the most brutal fashion imaginable. One boat at a time, one crew at a time, one commander following doctrine that killed him and his men. May had claimed 41 boats so far, 17 days, 41 boats. The month wasn't over, and the depth charges kept falling. The first warning signals had actually arrived months earlier, but nobody had connected them. U-boat commanders reporting unusually deep detonations. Survivors describing explosions far below the 200-foot level where doctrine said British charges couldn't reach. Intelligence summaries mentioning recovered debris with unfamiliar depth gauge markings. Each signal individually insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern that German naval intelligence missed until it was too late. The British development program had begun in 1941, immediately after analysing their own catastrophic escort losses in the first 2 years of war. The Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Committee understood they were fighting a defensive battle with inadequate weapons. Standard depth charges detonated at 150 feet maximum. German U-boats could dive to 300 feet routinely. Simple mathematics suggested the tactical problem. British weapons couldn't reach German submarines operating at prescribed depths. The solution was engineering, not physics. The basic depth charge design remained unchanged since 1917. 300 pounds of TNT or Torpex explosive in a cylindrical casing, a hydrostatic pistol, actuated by water pressure. The limitation wasn't the explosive, it was the pistol. Specifically, the depth sensor calibration and the structural strength of the mechanism at increased pressures. British engineers at HMS Vernon, the Navy's torpedo and mining school in Portsmouth, began systematic redesign work in early 1942. The challenge was straightforward. Create a pistol mechanism that could withstand pressure at 400, 500, even 600 feet depth, while maintaining reliable detonation accuracy within plus or minus 20 feet of the set depth. Material science solved the first problem. Hardened steel casings replaced brass. Thicker diaphragms resisted deformation at depth. Improved seals prevented water infiltration into the timing mechanism. These weren't revolutionary changes. They were incremental improvements, each individually minor. Together, they extended operational depth from 200 feet to 600 feet. Production began in March 1942 at factories throughout Britain. Sheffield steel mills produced the hardened casings. Manchester machine shops fabricated the improved pistol mechanisms. Birmingham explosives plants filled the charges with Torpex, 50% more powerful than TNT. By June, the first Mark VII depth charges with deep-setting capability entered service aboard Atlantic escorts. British operational security around this development was exceptional. The charges looked identical to standard weapons. Only the pistol mechanisms differed, and those were internal components not visible during normal handling. Depth settings were classified. Escort crews received instructions verbally. Nothing appeared in written signals traffic that German codebreakers could intercept. Captured charges sank with their ships or were deliberately destroyed before Germans could recover them. The result was a technological advantage that remained hidden for 8 months. From June 1942 through January 1943, British escorts deployed deep-setting depth charges against U-boats whose commanders had no knowledge the weapons existed. Boats dived to 300 feet following standard doctrine. Depth charges detonated at 350 feet. Boats died. German intelligence attributed the losses to mines, to aerial bombs, to acoustic torpedoes, to any explanation except the correct one, because depth charges detonating that deep were supposed to be impossible. By March 1943, production had ramped to 15,000 charges monthly, sufficient quantity to outfit every Atlantic escort with full loads of deep-setting weapons. And still, German intelligence detected nothing. No captured documents, no prisoner interrogations revealed the modification, no recovered wreckage provided intact examples. British security held until May. Until increasing U-boat losses forced desperate attacks on heavily defended convoys. Until damaged escorts had to abandon equipment in hasty retreats. Until German recovery vessels finally retrieved depth charge throwers with intact pistol mechanisms still attached. Until forensic examination revealed calibration markings indicating depths far beyond what German doctrine assumed possible. The discovery triggered immediate reassessment of all U-boat losses since January. The patterns emerged clearly once analysts knew what to look for. boats reporting successful deep dives before going silent, boats destroyed in areas where acoustic torpedo attacks were unlikely, boats sunk in conditions where aerial bombing wasn't feasible. All the mysterious losses suddenly had explanation. Deep-setting depth charges. Weapons the Germans didn't know existed, deployed by escorts who'd refined tactics for using them. The tactical implications cascaded through German naval planning like a torpedo striking an ammunition magazine. Every procedure needed revision. Every training manual required updating. Every commander's instinctive response to depth charge attack had to be unlearned. The psychological impact on crews would be devastating. Men who'd survived previous attacks by diving deep would understand their survival had been chance, not technique, that the method they'd trusted was statistically deadly. Dönitz understood the magnitude immediately. On May 24, 1943, after 43 U-boats lost in less than 4 weeks, he ordered a temporary withdrawal of boats from the North Atlantic. The official reason given was tactical reassessment and refitting. The real reason was more fundamental. German U-boats could no longer operate effectively in an environment where British technology had systematically eliminated German tactical options. The order represented a stunning admission. For the first time since 1939, the Kriegsmarine was conceding defeat in a major operational theatre. Not defeat through combat losses in a pitched battle, not defeat through numerical inferiority, but defeat through technological obsolescence. The weapons that had dominated the Atlantic in 1940 and 41 were inadequate against the defences deployed in 1943. The British had won the Battle of the Atlantic not through a single brilliant innovation, but through systematic incremental improvement, better radar for surface detection, better sonar for underwater tracking, better coordination between ships and aircraft, better tactics for convoy defence, and finally, better depth charges that could reach U-boats at any survivable depth. Each improvement individually represented evolutionary, not revolutionary, change. Together, they created a tactical environment where German U-boats faced detection, tracking, and destruction with mathematical certainty. The question wasn't whether a boat would be detected, it was when. And once detected, survival odds dropped to near zero against escorts equipped with modern weapons and tactics. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. In March 1943, U-boats sank 82 merchant ships totaling 476,000 tons. German losses were 12 boats. The exchange rate favoured Germany. 2 months later in May, U-boats sank 58 merchant ships totaling 299,000 tons. German losses were 43 boats. The exchange rate had reversed catastrophically. Allied merchant ship production exceeded losses. American Liberty ships rolled off assembly lines faster than U-boats could sink them. 1 ship every 42 days per shipyard, 18 shipyards operating simultaneously. More merchant tonnage launched monthly than Germany's entire submarine force could destroy in 3 months of intensive operations. The mathematics admitted no argument. Germany was losing the tonnage war, and now, with the revelation that British depth charges could reach boats at any depth, the tactical situation became untenable. U-boats couldn't hide, couldn't run, couldn't dive deep enough to escape. Every operational option involved accepting losses Germany couldn't sustain. At current attrition rates, the entire operational U-boat fleet would be destroyed within 6 months. The psychological impact on crews was immediate and devastating. Boats returning from patrol in late May brought stories that spread through the submarine bases like contagion, depth charge attacks at depths that should have been safe, explosions bracketing boats at 350 feet, boats forced to dive deeper and deeper trying to escape, until hull seams began weeping water under pressure, until control surfaces jammed, until battery compartments flooded from cracked seals. At the U-boat training school in Neustadt, instructors struggled to revise doctrine while maintaining morale. How do you tell students that the depth procedures they've learned are wrong? That the safe zones don't exist? That survival depends less on skill than on fortune? That every patrol now has mortality rates exceeding 50%? The answer was that you couldn't maintain morale while being honest about the tactical situation. Instructors emphasized new equipment coming: acoustic torpedoes that homed on propeller noise, radar detection devices that warned of aircraft, snorkel systems that allowed diesel operation while submerged. Each innovation genuine, each potentially valuable, none addressing the fundamental problem that British depth charges could reach U-boats anywhere they could survive. In the Atlantic, boats still at sea received the new tactical guidance by emergency signal: maximum dive depth limited to 150 feet, except under immediate attack. Even emergency dives not to exceed 250 feet. The reasoning was explicit: diving deep no longer provided safety. It merely brought boats into the kill zone where British depth charges were most effective. Better to stay shallow, where at least radar detection gave warning and boats retained maneuverability. The new doctrine reversed 4 years of training and experience. Commanders who'd survived by diving deep now had to stay shallow despite every instinct screaming to get deeper, get away from the surface where destroyers and aircraft hunted. Crews who'd trusted depth procedures now learned those procedures would kill them. The psychological strain was measurable. Submarine crews already faced the highest casualty rates in the German military. Now they faced them while being told their training was wrong. Not surprisingly, morale collapsed. Boats returned from patrol with crews at breaking point. Men who'd endured hours of depth charge attacks at depths they'd thought were safe, discovering those depths were actually within the British weapons kill zone. Men who'd followed procedure exactly and survived only through chance. Men who'd watched depth gauges pass 200 feet, then 250, then 300, believing they were reaching safety, never suspecting they were diving directly into the depth band where British charges were most effective. Some commanders ignored the new guidance. They'd survived previous attacks using deep diving. They trusted their experience over new doctrine based on British weapons they hadn't seen. They dived to 300 feet when attacks came. Some survived, most didn't. The British escorts had refined their tactics. They knew German boats would dive deep. They'd learned to drop depth charges in patterns bracketing the likely depth, dropping charges set for 250, 300, 350, 400 feet simultaneously. One of them would find the target depth. And at 300 feet, with limited maneuverability and exhausted battery power, a U-boat couldn't dodge. The German submarine campaign effectively ended in May 1943. Operations continued for 2 more years. Boats still departed on patrol. Some boats still sank merchant ships. Individual commanders still achieved success through extraordinary skill or luck. But the strategic initiative had passed permanently to the Allies. The U-boat threat that had nearly strangled Britain in 1942 was broken, not through one decisive battle, but through the accumulated weight of technological and tactical superiority that Germans couldn't match. The cost of learning this lesson was measured in steel coffins littering the Atlantic floor. 78 U-boats lost in May alone, 127 lost between August 1942 and May 1943, 85% from depth charging. 785 boats, total losses by war's end. 28,000 men dead from a force of 40,000. A 70% casualty rate, the worst of any military service on either side of the entire war. These weren't losses in fleet battles against superior forces. They weren't losses from overwhelming numerical disadvantage. They were losses from boats following doctrine based on incorrect assumptions about enemy capabilities. Doctrine that said, dive deep for safety. Doctrine that said British depth charges couldn't reach below 200 feet. Doctrine that was 18 months obsolete by the time German intelligence discovered the truth. The British depth charge program succeeded because British planners understood that winning required patience and systematic improvement, not revolutionary weapons, not brilliant tactics, just the disciplined application of engineering to incremental problems. Extend depth charge operational range. Increase explosive power. Improve production rates. Deploy the weapons without compromising operational security. Refine tactics for using them effectively, each step individually unremarkable. Together, they created a tactical revolution that German intelligence missed completely until recovered wreckage forced recognition. By then, over 100 U-boats were already lost. The damage to German submarine operations was irreversible. The tactical balance had shifted. There was no German counter, no technology in development that could restore the depth advantage, no tactical innovation that could offset British material superiority. The May 1943 crisis forced Germany to confront an uncomfortable reality. The Battle of the Atlantic was lost, not because German boats or crews were inadequate, but because British industrial capacity, combined with American production, made victory mathematically impossible. The Allies were building merchant ships faster than U-boats could sink them. The Allies were producing depth charges faster than U-boats could use torpedoes. The Allies were deploying technology that systematically eliminated German tactical options. Some boats continued operations throughout 1944 and into 45. New technologies provided marginal improvements. Schnorkel allowed submerged diesel operation, reducing surface exposure. Acoustic torpedoes occasionally defeated convoy escorts. Radar detectors gave warning of approaching aircraft, but these were tactical adjustments within a strategic defeat. The fundamental mathematics hadn't changed. U-boats faced detection and destruction with odds heavily favoring the Allies. Dönitz, promoted to Kriegsmarine commander after Grand Admiral Raeder's retirement, continued advocating for submarine operations despite the losses. His reasoning was grimly practical. Even if U-boats weren't sinking significant tonnage, they forced the Allies to maintain massive anti-submarine forces, hundreds of escorts, thousands of aircraft, millions of man-hours devoted to hunting submarines, resources that couldn't be used for bombing German cities or supporting ground offensives. By this calculation, U-boats were strategic assets, even in defeat. Their presence in the Atlantic forced Allied resource allocation away from other uses. Each boat at sea required multiple escorts to counter. Each potential submarine attack forced convoys to use slower routes and heavy protection. The economic cost to the Allies justified continued German losses, even at 70% casualty rates. This reasoning required accepting that U-boat crews were expendable, that boats departing on patrol had roughly 50-50 odds of returning, that the strategic goal was no longer winning the Atlantic but imposing costs on Allied operations. It was defensive thinking. The thinking of a force that had lost the initiative and was fighting merely to make victory expensive for the opponent. The crews understood this. Men departing La Rochelle or Saint-Nazaire in late 1943 weren't expecting glorious victories. They were expecting to die. Some wrote farewell letters before departure. Some made arrangements for families. Some went to sea knowing the odds and accepting them because duty required it, or because refusing meant court-martial and execution. The last stand became the defining characteristic of German submarine operations from June 1943 onward. Boats patrolling in waters increasingly dominated by Allied air power. Boats attacking convoys defended by escort groups using tactics refined through years of experience. Boats diving deep despite knowing depth provided no safety, because staying shallow guaranteed detection and destruction. Individual successes still occurred. In July 1943, U-boats sank 61 merchant ships. In November, 34 ships. Individual commanders achieved multiple victories through exceptional skill, but the aggregate numbers told a different story. Allied merchant tonnage launched exceeded Allied losses every month from mid-1943 onward. The gap between construction and losses widened steadily. By 1944, Allies were launching 3 ships for every one sunk. The German response was to build more submarines, new designs with better performance. Type XXI boats with streamlined hulls and large battery capacity for sustained, submerged operations. Type XXI coastal boats for operations in shallow waters. Advanced weapons including acoustic torpedoes and anti-escort missiles. Each innovation, technically impressive, each arriving too late to affect the outcome. The Type XXI represented genuine technological advancement. faster submerged than surfaced, capable of 3-hour high-speed runs underwater, large battery capacity for extended submerged patrols, advanced sonar for detecting targets without periscope exposure. If deployed in large numbers in 1942, these boats might have changed the battle's outcome. Deployed in small numbers in early 1945, they were irrelevant. The war was already lost. The final irony was that Germany's submarine technology eventually exceeded Allied capabilities in some areas. The Type XXI was superior to any Allied submarine design of the period. But technological superiority meant nothing when industrial capacity couldn't produce enough boats to matter. Germany commissioned 2 Type XXI boats before the war ended. Britain and America were building merchant ships at rates that made 2 submarines strategically irrelevant. The Battle of the Atlantic ended not with a treaty or a surrender, but with German fuel stocks exhausted and bases overrun by Allied ground forces. Boats at sea in April 1945 received orders to surface and surrender. Some commanders complied, others scuttled their boats rather than surrender. A few continued fighting until they ran out of fuel or torpedoes. When accounting was completed in June 1945, the statistics were brutal. 785 U-boats lost from all causes, 28,000 men dead, 3,500 Allied merchant ships sunk, 175 Allied warships destroyed. The exchange rate appeared favorable to Germany. Approximately 4 merchant ships sunk per U-boat lost. But tonnage mathematics revealed the truth. Allied merchant tonnage at war's end exceeded pre-war tonnage despite 4 years of submarine attacks. Germany's submarine fleet was effectively destroyed. The tonnage war was lost decisively. The British depth charge program, revealed through recovered wreckage in May 1943, represented a small but crucial component of Allied victory. Not the decisive factor, but one element in a comprehensive system of detection, tracking, and destruction that eliminated German tactical advantages. The revelation that depth charges could reach U-boats at any survivable depth forced German recognition that the strategic situation was untenable. That continuing operations meant accepting catastrophic losses for diminishing returns. The 700 U-boats that vanished beneath the Atlantic weren't destroyed by a single weapon or tactic. They were destroyed by the accumulated weight of Allied technological and industrial superiority applied systematically over 4 years. Better radar, better sonar, better depth charges, better tactics, better production, better coordination between ships and aircraft, each individually evolutionary, together overwhelming. For the German submariners who died following doctrine that was fundamentally compromised, who dived to depths they believed were safe, who trusted their training and paid with their lives, the lesson was too late. By the time German intelligence recognized that British depth charges could reach 300, 400, 500 feet, over 100 boats were already lost. The tactical balance had shifted irreversibly. There was no safe depth, no sanctuary, no procedure that guaranteed survival against escorts equipped with weapons that could reach them anywhere. The British captured depth charge that Hartenstein examined in that Berlin office in May 1943 represented 4 years of patient engineering work. Incremental improvements to a weapon design that dated from 1917. Nothing revolutionary, nothing brilliant. Just systematic application of metallurgy and production engineering to extend a weapon's capabilities beyond what opponents assumed possible. That depth charge pistol, set to detonate at 350 feet, killed the myth that depth provided safety, killed the doctrine that governed German submarine operations, killed the boats and crews that trusted that doctrine, not through malfunction or accident, but through functioning exactly as designed. Detonating at depths where German commanders believed they'd found sanctuary, proving that British engineering had solved a problem that Germans didn't know existed until the solution killed them. The Battle of the Atlantic was decided not by heroism or cowardice, not by brilliant admirals or incompetent commanders, but by the mundane reality that one side's industrial capacity exceeded the other's, that one side's technological development remained ahead of the other's intelligence services. That one side systematically identified problems and solved them, while the other side operated on assumptions that were 18 months out of date. 700 U-boats learned this lesson. Most learned it too late, in the final moments before their hulls imploded under pressure, or their compartments flooded, or their batteries died, leaving them helpless. They learned that depth was no safety. That doctrine was compromised, that the Atlantic offered no sanctuary against escorts equipped with weapons the crews never suspected existed until those weapons killed them. That small metal cylinder, 17 inches in diameter, 30 inches long, sitting on an examination table in Berlin in May 1943, represented the end of German submarine warfare as an effective strategic tool. The revelation came too late to save the boats already lost, too late to prevent the catastrophic casualties of May and June, too late to change the war's outcome. But it came in time to force recognition of an uncomfortable truth. The U-boat threat that had nearly starved Britain in 1942 was broken, not because German boats were inadequate or German crews incompetent, but because British engineering had solved the depth charge problem quietly, systematically, and completely. While German intelligence assumed British weapons couldn't reach beyond 200 feet, British factories were producing charges capable of 600 feet depth. While German commanders trusted doctrine that prescribed deep diving for safety, British escorts were dropping weapons that turned those depths into kill zones. The German submariners never had a chance, not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they were fighting with tactics based on enemy capabilities that were 18 months obsolete, following procedure that got them killed, trusting doctrine that was fundamentally wrong, diving deep with confidence in their safety, moments before British depth charges proved that safety was illusion. 700 U-boats vanished beneath the Atlantic waves. 28,000 men died, not in glorious fleet battles, not in heroic last stands, but in steel cylinders being methodically destroyed by weapons they never suspected could reach them. By depth charges detonating at depths their doctrine said were impossible, by British engineering that had evolved faster than German intelligence could track. When historians later analysed why Germany lost the Battle of the Atlantic, they identified many factors: Allied code-breaking, radar development, long-range aircraft, escort carriers, improved tactics, massive production capacity, all true, all important. But the depth charge revelation of May 1943 represented something more fundamental. The moment when German naval leadership confronted the reality that their tactical assumptions were wrong, that British capabilities exceeded their intelligence estimates, that boats and crews were dying because doctrine was based on outdated information about enemy weapons. That realization came too late to save the 100 boats already lost to deep-setting charges. Too late to prevent the catastrophic losses of Black May. Too late to change the strategic outcome. But it came in time to force recognition that continuing submarine operations meant sending men to die in a battle already lost. That the mathematics of attrition favored the Allies so heavily that German victory was impossible. That the depth advantage Germans had counted on simply didn't exist. The small British depth charge pistol, recovered from Atlantic wreckage and examined in Berlin, told the entire story. British engineering had systematically solved a problem Germans didn't know existed. Extended depth charge operational range while maintaining security so strict that Germans detected nothing for 8 months. Deployed the weapons in quantities sufficient to equip every Atlantic escort. Refined tactics for using them effectively. Created a weapon system that eliminated German tactical options and forced recognition of defeat. 700 U-boats paid the price for that German failure to track British technological development. 28,000 men died. The lesson they learned, at terrible cost, was simple and devastating. There was no safe depth anymore. British engineering had taken that advantage away. And once gone, it couldn't be recovered. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.